outside here. It's the door, hold on. Yeah, alright, had to go outside on my backyard and the deck. This is it, baby. Episode 4 coming up. I already did a previous episode 4, but it was just me playing songs on the keyboard, and I was playing so badly that I think I'm going to leave that one on the shelf for now. Maybe I'll put it up as episode 5, though. Because I'm still, my idea is still to try and mix music and talking. This is going to be a talking episode. Let's see. It's 11 p.m. June 1st. Malt liquor fridge. What are we going to talk about? I just listened to my friend's podcast. He just started a podcast too. He probably has more people listening. He probably sends it to his friends. But I'm just sending this podcast back to him. Because we started a podcast at the same time. Let's see, anyway, what to talk about today? I guess I'll just talk about everything that's on my mind. What I did today, I'm drinking coffee right now. I'm back into drinking coffee. For a while, it just made me too anxious. There was a while where I couldn't drink coffee as recently as probably a couple weeks ago. A couple months where I couldn't really drink coffee like I like to. I like to drink it like all day long. There's a while where it just made me too mentally anxious. I felt more mentally unstable over the past many months. Really since, as I talk about my sobriety. I've had a binge drinking problem for many years, but I stopped. I'm currently sober. I shouldn't say I've stopped because I might have a relapse or something, but I've been stopped for like 3.5 months since I think the middle of February. But since getting sober, because my pattern was to binge drink, every couple weeks or 1 week, 1 to 3 weeks. But since stopping completely and being totally sober, I've actually felt more anxiety. Not mentally, really, but just in my body. I guess because I'm developing this newfound stability, which I haven't had as a regular presence in my life for a long time. So just building this new strength and stability is taking time. But I can feel it getting there. What I did today is what I'll talk about next. I'm going to get better at podcasting over time. Right now, I'm just doing it to get into the swing of things. What did I do today? Oh yeah, well, I'll talk about my music. As I said, the last episode that I tried to record, I was playing the keyboard. I'm going to try and play both the guitar and the keyboard and kind of work on my keyboard chops a little bit. Right now, I just have to know the rudimentary basics. But that's not important. What am I even talking about? Yeah, music. Today, I've been trying to write songs, writing little pieces of songs. But today I didn't do anything. I just took a break with my music. I'll listen back to some old recordings from many years ago because I'm trying to gather up some songs to play with a band. But I didn't attempt writing anything Wow, this is a boring episode so far, but that's okay. But after, I also listened to some music on YouTube. Then I went on a bike ride, and I rode my bike to a nearby high school called Shades Valley High School. And what I do is I go to they have a football stadium there at the high school, and I just like jump around on the stadium, and there's rails on the front part of the stadium, and I just do pull-ups and climb. I'm trying to learn how to do parkour and climbing. Like my brother, not my friends, but a couple of my younger brother's friends do climbing, rock climbing, mountain climbing, and I'd like to try my hand at that. I think I'd be good at it because I'm pretty lean, but pretty muscly. Not muscly, like I don't have big muscles, but I'm lean but strong, and I think I could be good at mountain climbing. So I just go to the high school, this nearby high school, and climb around in the stadium and various structures and jump around and climb. And yeah, I did that for like an hour and a half. Then, I was probably at the stadium for like an hour and a half. Rode there, did my workout, rode back on my bike. And then, since getting back, I've been listening to music. I just finished listening to my friend's podcast. I might link it in the description box if he wouldn't mind. Like I said, he probably has more listeners than I do. I'm basically just doing this as a personal diary right now. As I develop, I just moved my mouth really close to the phone microphone. Looks like it got a lot louder. But yeah, I got back. No, that's jumping ahead in my thoughts. Yeah, I'm just doing this as a personal diary kind of thing so far. My podcast. Got back from the bike ride. Then listened to some music. What else did I do? Made some Facebook posts pertaining to the protests and riots that have been happening in response to the George Floyd death, police killing, the killing of George Floyd by a police officer, and the whole shebang that set in motion with people rioting and stuff. It's even come here to Alabama, many cities here. I think they had to instate a curfew because people were being too disruptive. But I made some posts about the overall issue. When I think about issues like this, I try to take a big picture. I try to take as big picture of a view as possible and not get hung up on the minutia. I think this killing may have been staged. I don't have evidence of that, so I haven't looked into it enough to collect evidence to make that case. But my hunch is that it may have been staged, a staged event, a hoax, just so that people would react like this and they'd have an excuse to impose more authoritarianism on the citizens. Because like the video where the black guy, George Floyd, is getting killed, he's appearing to be killed. In the video, the police officer is there with his knee on his neck, and there's someone standing there just filming him for the entire time. And the guy's looking straight in the camera. I mean, why? Wouldn't you tell the person to stop recording, especially if it was clear the guy was, you got your knee on the guy's neck. Why would you continue doing that on film, knowing that it would almost certainly go viral, and people would have this crazy reaction? Wouldn't you stop and try to get the people filming. You wouldn't want to do that in plain view of a bunch of people, especially this grotesque method of restraining the black guy by having your knee on his neck. I mean, just the visual of that is so extreme. It feels like it was designed to induce this reaction in people. There's the whole concept of an agent provocateur. That's probably not the right pronunciation because it's a French term. But an agent provocateur is someone that just intentionally provokes things to incite a reaction, or to make it appear as though something happened, so that then they'll have justification to do something else. So look into that term, agent provocateur. I wouldn't say this police officer, I think the guy's name was Derek something, this police officer that is in the video killing the black guy, I wouldn't say he's like an agent provocateur for like the police, but my suspicion wouldn't be that he's connected just to the police, but with some kind of deeper government force. Because obviously this becomes a whole media event. Not just the killing, but the people's reaction to it, with all the protests and all the chaos that follows. So it's intended to be an entire, all-consuming media event. And my hunch is that these sorts of things come from forces deeper in the government. Like the CIA manipulates all around the world, everywhere they operate. They operate all over the world, but especially like in the Middle East, they're infiltrated into all the terrorist groups, and they do stuff to play one against the other, and they just use them like little puppets. They have their hands in everything, so they'll make one side do something, then the other side reacts, and they manipulate the reaction. So they're just like two puppets they're controlling and putting on this entire show, all for the sake of mass perception. It's basically my thinking. So just fundamentally, I'm suspicious about I don't want to say suspicious because that makes it seem like coming from a place of paranoia. But I find that just the original event dubious in itself. And that's just the foundational event of this entire story I find dubious. And that's my first jumping off point, but just in the way that people react so extremely and so predictably. That's sort of the broad issue I'm talking about in my posts. I won't recite the posts that I made because it's not necessary. Plus, I can't recall everything I said. It's just about manipulating people. But yeah, to follow from that, it's about manipulating people, but in what particular way? What are they trying to manipulate specifically? Well, they want to antagonize the political divisions that exist in the country. The racial divide, sure, but more sort of explosively, the political issue of the left and the right. They're the people who are big into BLM, Black Lives Matter, and all these people that are leftists. And then they're the people who are law and order. The left and right. That divide is even more important than the racial one, But they're trying to do both, whatever they can to antagonize divisions within the country and make it worse. But the political is real, because the way that conservative people react when they see all these huge protests and because inevitably there are extreme acts that happen in the protests and things that are particularly sensational. Naturally, those get taken and blown up more by the media, because it always accentuates the negative, and human psychology tends to focus on the negative because it just seems more significant. That's not very articulate, but yeah, I'll get more articulate as I do this podcast more. So yeah, the protests happen. Naturally, there's some extremism and various extreme acts that happen. These were pretty crazy all around from what I've seen, or at least much crazier than the protests that have come before. But yeah, the protests happen. The extreme negatives get blown up even more by the media. And this produces a fear response in the conservatives, because they see it and they have a range of associations to what they see. They see, some people starting a fire, and just one like 15 second clip of some Antifa people fighting somebody else, fighting like a store owner. One little tiny clip of some leftists fighting some conservative or someone on the other side. That in itself, you see that, and you instantly associate it with all the other baggage it carries for you personally, depending on your politics. So the conservatives see that. How do they interpret it? Well, duh. To them, it's just the crumbling of society as a result of the leftists. It reinforces their whole idea that the leftists, the Democrats, are destroying America. And it hardens them on their war footing, their ideological war footing that they have towards those people. It hardens them in this sense of political opposition. And it just cements that even further for them, that leftists are a serious danger and a serious threat. And what do you do to a serious danger or a threat? Well, you have to fight it. So they occupy themselves even more with fighting this threat that they have created in their imagination. And obviously the other side, the left wing, does the same too. Because what happens there? Well, the same thing happens, but just the mirror image. Little tiny clips of right-wingers being violent, or police, shooting rubber bullets and doing the stuff that they're invariably going to do to suppress or to impose order on the protesters and rein in the protesters. Little clips of that. What is that? What does all that information do to them? All these clips of the police and right-wingers being bad. It reinforces their idea that there's this enormous threat from white supremacists and the police and white nationalists or Trump or white people. So it just confirms people's pathological view of the world. And it hardens their political opposition towards the opposing side. So it just exacerbates this rift in the population and has an escalating effect on the rhetoric and just makes reconciliation even more unlikely. And that's what's happening. Some things in particular that I'd so the posts I made today were mostly about this fear that's happening. The weaponization of fear. The weaponization of fear by way of distorted information that gets fed to people. That yeah. I'm trying to choose my words to say something interesting. The weaponization of fear. You know, a while back I was thinking about demons. And evil in the spiritual world and the way that evil operates in spiritual terms. And basically what it does is it produces an extremely distorted picture of reality. That's what demons do. I haven't really thought about this ahead of time. But demons produce distorted pictures. And if you believe in them, you're made unwell because you've accepted a wrong vision of reality. Your perception's been warped by this demonic kind of vision, this demonic distortion of reality. That's basically what demons do. What it really is just the weaponization of fear. Not always necessarily fear like in the really dark way. It can also distort reality in a way that confirms wrong ideas that you have. So you're receiving a distorted picture, but not in the sense of fear, in the sense of feeding an existing bias that you have. And that's basically what's happening. The weaponization of fear. And it works because people, like my friend said in his podcast, people in America don't really know themselves. They don't know each other. And especially younger people, they don't really know the world. They just know it through their phones. They just know reality through information they're receiving from the media. And it's just full of distorted images, just like the demons do. All these political caricatures, and it's almost entirely just distortion of particular ideas of people. You know, whatever idea you have about your political enemies, you create a caricature of that and just distort it more and more and more. That's what racism is. Just progressive distortions of an image of another racial group. And when people attach to these distortions, that's the major problem. That's where sickness begins. When you attach to this distorted image and you begin affirming it and growing it yourself and feeding this sickness, that's when the real sickness and evil begins. That's when racism and things like that get really malignant, when people affirm these distorted images and begin feeding them and growing them into more and more monsters, basically. It's just mental images that are animated with mental images that are brought to life by the imagination, and which take on a life of their own. That's basically what a demon is, in the sense that it's basically what a demon is. A mental image, a distorted mental image brought to life by the imagination that takes on a life of its own. That's what a demon is. So a lot of what's happening can be viewed in the spiritual perspective. Like, not distantly, but in a very, very direct way. You can look at it spiritually first and foremost without having to kind of abstract it further. So much of what's happening, really, to me, the clearest way to think of it is in spiritual terms. Yeah. Because like in the Middle Ages, the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. I guess there's historical revisionism where maybe they weren't as dark as they actually were, and a lot of cool stuff actually happened back then, and people were more advanced than we give them credit for. But it was compared to points of history we would call heights of civilization. The Middle Ages was a Dark Ages. People just lived in their village, and they had a very provincial life, a very simple life. They just lived in the village and farmed, and they didn't really travel outside where they lived most of their life. But the thing is, the culture of the time, the medieval Middle Ages culture is full of demons. It's all these fairy tales and tales of terrible beasts and mythical, frightening mythical creatures. What that is people, this is my interpretation, people that live in a tiny little world. Everything outside that world is the unknown, and so their mind fills in that unknown with a bunch of fearful imaginings. Where your knowledge ends, your imagination begins. And if you're afraid of exploring that unknown and seeing what it's really about, you're going to fill it in with a lot of fear, invariably. Not deliberately, but just because you don't know what's out there. You don't know what's out there, so you're going to imagine the worst. Or the potential for the worst. So the point is, where knowledge ends, the imagination begins. And that's basically the reason for all this political and racial division happening right now. The two sides don't really communicate, and they don't know each other. I think black people in America, in the U.S., black people and white people in America don't really know each other that well yet, even though we're supposedly post-racial. Blacks and whites still mostly live in separate areas. Not totally, but there's still a lot of separation. Most black people often live in the inner city or the city. And then, they got a bunch of well-to-do white people living in the outlying areas, the suburbs. Then there's the poor white people living in the country, and that's just usually white people out there in the country. So they don't really know, the two sides don't really know each other that well. And they're still coming from a place of ignorance and fear derived from ignorance. Yeah? People don't even know each other yet. They've never really even interacted with each other. Yet they're full of fear of each other. It's all consuming, and it's being fed by media, because now people don't live in real life. They live on their phone or on watching TV. More and more of people's sense of reality is coming from media, especially social media, which, as I just said, always amplifies greatly amplifies the worst things, the worst, most negative aspects of any reality, any situation. Those are always amplified. I'd like to explore why that is. I'll have to think about it first, because my first podcast, I don't think I talked any about events in the world. This is my first going down that route. But yeah, social media amplifies the negative. Social media boosts the negative. I think it's just basic crowd psychology and fear. It's just fear. It's fear, but it's also a sordid and a morbid interest in anything bad or evil. In a way, people are just titillating themselves with all these horrifying images and offensive content. People love to be offended. Right now, people love to be offended. It's their favorite thing to do. It's honestly like people think it's a virtue to be offended, because there's a pleasure in being offended at something and for throwing into a tizzy or a hissy fit because something made you mad. I guess because being mad is kind of a life-affirming energy in a way, because at least you're feeling alive and you get to fulminate and rage. It's more pleasurable to be mad than it is to just be despondent and bored. So people are taking pleasure in it. They're taking pleasure in it. That's why social media amplifies these negatives and the worst aspects of human behavior, because people like it. So it really just says something about people, about where we're at. It's just all drama. People like it. I don't know, I guess it fills some need for purpose in their life, to have these things that they're constantly raging at and getting mad at. People they're canceling, people to focus on. Because so much of social media is just the obsessive fixation on persons. That's what politics is. Especially politics on Twitter. If whoever listens to this ever uses Twitter. I use it as a source of information, not like I get news from Twitter, just to see where people are talking about and to see where the conversation is. And a lot of it's politics, but in terms of politics on Twitter, it's all about people. It's never about ideas. It's never about what's actually going on. It's just obsessive, almost entirely negative focus on persons and figures. What my friend called psychic focal points. That's the term that he likes to use. This is all just people filling some void in their life. And, getting the sense that they have a purpose they're living for, when maybe they really don't that much. And they're really just all deluding themselves. That might sound mean, but I think it's a lot of what's going on. Because people are just taking way too much pleasure in all this hatred and mob mentality. Just stamping your feet and getting mad. It's all drama. It's all drama. So yeah, that's one part of it. Another that I've seen is this whole thing with leftists. I don't know. I don't like to use political labels that much, but I guess you'd call them leftists. People who are... I'd just call them leftists. Maybe they're SJWs. No one uses that term to describe themselves anymore, SJW. It's become a complete pejorative. But like, there's people that think of themselves as left, or who are left. I guess they are left. All these left people, because I'm friends with a lot of them on Facebook. I follow a lot of them on. Well, I see a lot of them on Twitter. I don't really follow a lot of people on Twitter, but tons of maybe most of my friends on Facebook are towards the left, and they're in this whole, revolution idea. But the line that they've all taken on these riots is that, looting is a protest. It's all, they're taking this line that it's all protest. And it's a legitimate, authentic expression of political, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. They're trying to do apology for it all, basically, and they're trying to launder all this destructive behavior happening as righteous politics. They're trying to represent their kind of using ideological filters to represent all this destruction as righteous politics. That it's all coming from a place of political earnestness. And I think that's wrong. It's just a bunch of people who want to break shit. It's just a bunch of people that want to destroy. It's just what they're, not because they're evil people, but because they're just having a good time. That's not to totally trivialize, it's not to trivialize the protests. I know there's, maybe most of the people involved are there to protest, and they're very serious-minded, and they're doing it out of a genuine political conviction. But these people that are just going into stores and stealing shit, that's not protest. That's not what they're doing. So people are trying to represent it as something else. And what I'm kind of seeing here is the way everything is backwards. People's valuation is upside down. Just a bunch of people setting fire to a store for fun is now a genuine act of protest. It's not. That's not why they're doing it. And they know it. But people are lying to themselves. So there's this mass delusion happening where people are kind of rendering just naked destruction as political righteousness and political conviction and action, when it's not. It's just a total delusion happening. People are being deceived. And like looting stuff, whatever, dude. That's what happens in a thing like this. But it's just people taking advantage of the situation. They're not coming from a place of political. I can never think of the right word. They're not coming from a place of political intention. Their intention is not to. Whatever. So people are seeing something, and then they're filtering it through their ideology to represent it as something else. Which is in contrast to what it actually is. So you're looking at people just going around burning stuff and breaking stuff and getting into fights. And they're taking this rosy-eyed view of it. They're taking this really naive view. They're being really naive. I don't think they realize it. They think they're being politically woke or something like that. They think they're well-intentioned, but they're taking this very naive view and kind of turning a blind eye to reality in favor of an ideological fairy tale that they're telling themselves. That said, I've always supported Black Lives Matter. When it first started happening, I guess the first big one was in Ferguson in 2014 with Michael Brown. This is before I began digging into all this kind of what people might call conspiracy stuff and all that. This is before I really began digging deep into what's really going on. I kind of still had back then I didn't really pay much attention to the news. I never really read the news, but I still had sort of a skeptical view of a lot of things. But when those 2014 protests about the black guy Michael Brown being killed by the police, I was really into it. That was when I first gotten into Twitter, and I was following a lot of people. I made a bunch of posts about it, and I was really inspired by the whole energy, enthusiasm people had about the cause. So I've always been a supporter. And, after that, there were several other... I remember when Trayvon Martin happened, that was at a point when I wasn't paying attention at all to the news, but starting with Michael Brown in 2014, and a bunch of people after, Eric Garner, I was always a supporter of the cause, Black Lives Matter. I mean, there's obviously excessive police in the U.S., and the whole thing's just about money. I mean, it's just a huge racket, the whole justice system. It's just all about extracting money from the population. There was a while where I sort of embraced that, F the cops mentality a little bit. And looking back, I can't lie. A lot of it was just because it felt fun at the time. It kind of felt edgy and a little rebellious. So I had that kind of mentality of F the cops, fuck the cops, fuck 12. It comes from a real place, because obviously there is abuse coming from the police. And the whole thing is just a total racket. There's just way too much police. In the United States. But since then, I've seen the whole F the police trend get bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's like, if you don't say kill the cops, you're bad. You know what I mean? It's like things have gotten so extreme that they've become backwards. Now you're sent to the concentration camp, figuratively speaking, for not saying kill the cops or all cops are bastards. They're not all bastards. I don't think I've ever said all cops are bastards. Even though I've had troubles with the law, run-ins, DUI arrests, and stuff like that. I mean, they're not all bad. There's bad ones. There's bad people in any group of people. They're not all bad. But I do see the issue of, people within the force not taking a stand against abuses from their coworkers, because usually the force on the overall works to protect their own, even the ones that are doing bad stuff. And obviously there's corruption involved. It's all money. In big cities, I'm sure the police are quite corrupt. NYPD and LAPD. It's all about money. That's another thing. It's all about money. So there's this whole race war happening. And the two main divides are the political divide, left versus right, and the racial divide, black versus white. They're separate but related, because usually, of course, conservatives are more white, whereas black people aren't left, but like the left adopts the cause of black people as their cause. So that the two divides are somewhat related, but the racial thing in particular is just getting crazier and crazier, and it's a very big problem in my opinion. Maybe I see that more clearly than other people because I'm from Birmingham. This might actually be a pretty good podcast because I have a lot to talk about. The racial thing I think is a big problem. The racial divide, which I think is widening. Not in reality, but in the collective hallucination of culture. That's what culture is. It's a big dream. Culture is just a big dream that people are having, which changes and fluctuates and flows as society moves on, as history moves on. The dream of the culture changes. And so the divide between black and white, I don't think is widening in real life. Maybe some due to more people being in poverty now, and usually since black folks are poorer, they're more in poverty on the whole than black people. But the racial divide is widening culturally because it's being intentionally widened, because there are so many people who are ill-intentioned, who are completely coming from a place of self-interest, that are seizing on this issue of race to boost their own voice and create relevance for themselves. It's become a whole thing. It's all just social media performance. People just stunting online to get points and get likes, get positive reinforcement in virtual reality. But you see that what began as some stupid little thing on social media, people being dumb online, is getting sucked up more and more into higher levels of the culture. And here I'm making kind of a hand gesture to illustrate this getting sucked up. What began as something that just regular people are doing online, being racist and whatever to get points, is becoming more and more a part of mainstream culture. But disguised as justice, disguised as a crusade for justice and something with very altruistic intentions, which are totally false. It's all just a huge trend. And these celebrities that are taking up this issue and talking about black and white, not all of them. You know, like Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, I think he's genuine. I think people like that, taking a knee, things like that are gestures that, to me, are earnest. There's a lot of people are earnest, but a lot of people are just appropriating this issue of race to build their own esteem and to boost their kind of image in the eyes of the culture. And that's definitely something to watch. I'd like to go more in depth, but I'm trying to collect my thoughts on it. Because again, there's sort of a feeling of being edgy about it. And when there's a feeling of being edgy, there's sort of an incentive to push it further and do stuff even that you know is bad, because you feel like you're accomplishing some kind of justice, or some kind of you feel like you're accomplishing some kind of justice, since there's this sense of righteousness attached to the issue. People often push it further than they should, even to a point where they know it's not really good what they're saying, but it still feels justified because they're kind of working for this ideal, if that makes any sense. So people have an incentive to say more and more extreme stuff because they feel that it's helping the cause. They feel it's a crusade. So there's an incentive to be more and more extreme because they're fighting a crusade. So therefore what they do is justified. And I see a lot of that, more every day. Or a lot every day anyway. Every single day on Facebook. I'm sorry, it's become a whole trend. Monkey see, monkey do. That's human psychology in a nutshell. My friend has his podcast about human psychology. And it's kind of basic. A lot of the time, monkey see, monkey do. Monkeys, that gets into another part. This whole racial thing, the race war that people are falling into. This is like devolution. This is like regressing into a previous level of civilization. You know what I mean? It's just monkey shit. That's not a racial reference. Black people, white people, they're just falling into an inferior level of consciousness, viewing, the world in racial terms. It's dumb. Of course, that's what they want. I made a post recently on Facebook, and someone commented and said that every empire that's ever fallen has fractured along racial lines. Yeah, I can see that. It's because when things fall apart, what happens? Well, people go to the most basic level, the default setting of psychology. And that's what's happening. Things are falling apart, and people are regressing to this previous stage of progress. And there's no way you can convince me otherwise. There's no way anyone can convince me that becoming racist isn't regressing or becoming inferior. There's no way anyone can convince me that it's something that has any value or any real worth to it to become racist. And I see that as a very negative trend. Because there are people on my Facebook that post. There are people on my Facebook who are more inclined to kind of be white pride, or not white pride, and not white nationalist, but they're coming from a place of white culture needs to be protected. Hold on. Okay, I had to stop the recording there for a minute because I thought my sister was coming outside to tell me that she could hear me through the window or something. I'm out here on the deck, and her bedroom is kind of close. I was thinking maybe I was talking too loud, so I stopped it to move. But then she said she can't hear me, so I'll continue. But yeah, that thought that I was on. Yeah, some people on my Facebook I was talking about racism and the black-white thing and the racial divide that's being exacerbated. Some people on my Facebook post kind of, white culture defense, defense of white people and white culture, and some people might call them white nationalists, but they're just coming from a place of we have to defend white culture, and it's being attacked, and we need to stand up, and etc. So I have people on my Facebook feed on both sides, but what I see is just the widening divide. On the left, I see a lot of people who are being misled and who are being deceived about maybe because they're being willfully naive or just willfully willfully naive, but they're being deceived about all this anti-white stuff, that it's something that it's something good, or that it has validity, when it's just basically just fallacy. That's what you see that I think is kind of troubling, is this representation of fallacious arguments as having validity on some kind of ideological basis. Things just representing plain racism as politically conscious or enlightened. It's just totally backwards. You don't judge people by their race. You don't just attack people. You can't just attack white people or penalize them just for being white. You can't start doing that. Because once you've given assent to that policy and that way of organizing affairs in the world, it continues and it grows and gets worse. And that's what's happening. Because people haven't taken a clear line, a clear stance against some of what's happening. Because there's a lot of deception happening. I don't know if I want to go into all that, but I kind of do. I think I will. This is my fourth podcast here. Malt Liquor Fridge, episode 4. I like where we're going with this podcast. I like this episode. I like what I've talked about so far. I think I've said some good stuff. Yeah, these riots, the looting. I've seen a lot of posts, looting is a form of protest. I mean, get real. It's just people trying to get some free stuff. If that's what they want to do, I guess that's what they're going to do. I mean, it's kind of inevitable when in this kind of chaotic situation. It's something that happens, and in a way, it's just part of the riot. But it's not protest. I mean, get real. They're not doing it to they're not doing it to make a political statement or to do something out of they're not coming from political conviction. It's just people trying to get free stuff. Like, come on. And that's what I see, just the attempt to whitewash and launder reality via ideology as something politically righteous. Lying to yourself about the reality of what you're seeing. And what you're seeing basically is just America falling apart. But why? Why? And this connects to the post I was making on Facebook. It's falling apart because people are falling apart. Because people are just regressing into idiotic worldviews. Just mass idiocy. Mass stupidity. Like some people say, a post-truth world. A post-truth society. Where it's not, it's you get in trouble when you point out the fallacious nature of some of these statements. Well, that's an understatement. You get in trouble when you contradict these ideas that are plainly wrong. A kid could see that they're wrong, and you get in trouble when you contradict it. To the extent sometimes of getting, canceled or singled out for castigation by the mob for stating something that is plainly obvious. And so things are falling apart because society is falling apart. Culture is regressing into something inferior. It's like the tarot card, the Wheel of Fortune. When the card depicts a wheel, and there's a monkey on one side and I think like a dog on the other side, and the monkey's like falling down the Wheel of Fortune. What that is just falling into an inferior level of consciousness and inferior behavior. The way everyone's just decided to become racist again. And then they're acting like it's okay. It's not. Don't be racist. Just full stop. Against black or white. What does that accomplish? It accomplishes nothing. And it's all reactive. The two sides just react to each other. The person commenting on my Facebook post was saying that his point was that, racism is kind of a fundamental part of human psychology on some level. Like everyone sort of is racist and demonstrates affinity for their own group. And it's something that has always been and will always be. And I'm like, yeah. But that doesn't mean become full-blown racist in response to other people's stupid shit. Just because you see them doing it, you think you have to do it to match what they're doing. Doesn't make any sense. Just stop. Just rise above. It's hard, but it's not hard. It's very simple. Just don't give in to that temptation to start hating people for something so unimportant in the grand scheme. And that's what you're seeing. It's just a total collapse of morality. A total collapse of humanity. Really. I mean, it's just a collapse of humanity. But a lot of it is just happening in the realm of culture, not life. It's just happening online, and then this kind of mass hallucination of the internet. And, culture. At this point, and another thing, so much of our culture, the information we receive and the images and so forth that we partake in, so much of it is so manipulated from higher levels of power, higher levels with agendas. So much of our culture is manipulated that it's just this huge stage-managed hallucination. It's all just a huge stage-managed hallucination. So it's not real life. It's all an illusion. Society's collapsing, but it's sort of collapsing in this illusory dream we're all having called society or culture. Now, you see it on the internet, you see it expressing in real life too, but it's more on the internet. But it's going to be more in real life. But it doesn't have to be, because it's all an illusion. And it's just people buying into this nonsense that fuels this breakdown that we're watching happen. And like my dad is conservative. I live here with my family. He's a conservative. He's been a lifelong Republican voter. And he was watching the news coverage about the protesters here in Birmingham, and they were getting kind of crazy or whatever, and the protesters here were getting kind of crazy, and they had to institute a curfew. And they took down a Confederate statue. My dad was watching the news coverage and getting all mad, getting mad at them, these animals, these protesters, whatever. Dude, You're falling into that trap. You're just getting manipulated. I mean, yeah, they're idiots. My dad's a smart guy. I don't mean to say he's being, dumb or anything, but like, you're just falling into the trap because they want to exacerbate this antagonism between the two sides, politically speaking. They want to make people hate each other, okay? Because when you hate each other, you're consumed with that hatred, and you're fighting the other side, and you're not really fighting what you should be fighting. You're not paying attention to what's really going on. So it's all an illusion. This divide is almost entirely just a manipulated illusion that people are very gullible to fall into. It has a basis of truth, but they take that little kernel of truth and make it galactic in scale. They blow up a tiny little kernel of reality into something as big as a mountain, making a mountain out of a molehill. So this all exists to make people hate each other, basically. I'm going to continue talking, man. I guess I do have a lot to say. I do have a lot to say. I probably post several posts on Facebook a day. I keep them brief because I try to keep them brief because most people don't read too much on there. The most concise distillation of an idea on Facebook or Twitter is the best to go with. It's hard on Twitter. I won't get into that, but the simplest, most concise distillation of an idea, of your point, is the best way. And I post about this stuff a lot on Facebook, but often people don't see it. And that's obviously the effect that's happening. This is manipulating the country towards a race war. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. Because, like the guy said on my Facebook thread, racism is kind of ingrained psychologically because it's the other. It's an out-group that you don't have natural biological reasons to really seek harmonious relationships with. There's no natural biological thing making you... You're inclined to see the other race as the other race. They're different from you. And so when there's this cultural perception, this cultural narrative of black versus white, this affects everybody. And it's very subtle. It begins very subtly, but it grows so fast. Once you've taken on that racist view, and you started to view those people as, firstly, and through a negative racial lens, it gets worse and worse, and you become more and more estranged from being able to relate to those people. And it's crazy, because it's being fueled by our culture. And it makes no sense. I mean, really, what are the police? The police are the government. The police are the government. I was going to say the police hurt white people and black people. They do hurt black people more. Only a fool would deny that. I mean, I know that without doing any research whatsoever. It's just common sense. All the times I went to jail here in Birmingham, the jail was full of black people. Because those communities are heavily policed, and they just have cycles of crime, and people just keep going to jail. So obviously the black people are getting it harder. But the issue is the police. You have to change that system. Change the system, which is hard. But that's what you have to do. You can't just scream at your fellow citizens and get mad at them like they have some kind of way to fix the problem. Like that's going to fix anything. So yeah, that's the main thing happening now is this protest or riot thing. Let's see, you got 17 minutes here. I don't want to make this too long, but I've said a lot. I was going to talk more about music, because when I got home I listened to some stuff, listened to some Civil War songs by the 2nd South Carolina String Band. Relevant, because we're being manipulated to another civil war, but really we're just being manipulated to a collapse. What I've said to some people is it's like America's being thrown in the trash can. America's being just tossed into the dumpster, and it's being set on fire, the dumpster. What I think is happening are these global powers, the big money, global capital. They're sort of disinvesting from America and shifting their investments elsewhere. China's coming up, Asian countries. Soon, maybe places in the Middle East or whatever. They're disinvesting, they're cutting their ties, they're cutting their losses in America, and they're moving everything overseas. I think mostly to China, because that's the emerging global power. So what do they care if America just burns? Not at all, because they can just move somewhere else. And I think it's a thing like the last remaining juice is being squeezed out of the United States. The last little bits of life are being extracted, and then once that's done, it's just going to get thrown away and discarded. So I do see dark times coming up. Dark times are ahead, both from the culture going crazy, but also from this larger historical change involving the declining empire of America. It's because what's happening with our culture is situated within the larger historical arc of the decline of the American empire, the decline of American supremacy, which I see happening, although of course we're still the dominant hegemon. Our power seems to be on the decline. And so the system, you look at empires through history. Towards the end, it's all just total depravity. Towards the end of any empire, just ends in total depravity, and degeneracy. Just psychopathic greed. People looting. People just loot the remaining wealth to be taken and just basically run off with it. Just people try to take what they can while there's still something to take. And that's the same ethos of these looters. They're not coming from a place of political idealism, and people need to disabuse themselves of that delusion. It's just take what you can get, take what you can, and run away with it. All right, that's not a solution. Just take whatever money you can get and run away with it. That's the ethos of a dying empire, and it's what everyone has adopted completely. From the looters and the riots to the looters way up in the government and the corporate world. They all have the same mentality. It's just psychopathic self-interest or sociopathic self-interest. Just greed, just total greed. But the thinking there, on behalf of on the part of the citizens, the people that loot and riots and loot stores and have this burn it all down mentality, their thinking is that like they're being smart by doing that. So everything's just falling apart. Fuck it and get what, and just try to get what you. Just say fuck it and try to get what's yours while you still can. Okay, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. These problems are going to be here until they get fixed. And we're going to have to fix them, basically. Because, yeah, America's getting thrown in the trash. And dark times are coming. And it's not going to get fixed until we fix it. And the way to fix it is not to burn everything down. But that's the narrative. That's the delusion people are embracing. The problems will be there until they get fixed. The world that we want is not going to exist until we create it. People are not understanding that because they're so overtaken with anger and just hatred. Like another friend of mine commented on one of the posts I made today. It's all just self-interest. There's no, none of these people care. There are a lot of good people that really care. I think most of the protesters really care. Let me make that very clear. Most of the protesters that really care. They're really genuinely motivated by good intentions. But a lot of people don't. And there's a lot of fear coming from the way people are being manipulated. And coming from the illusions that are being broadcast to people. What else to say? Yeah, America's just getting thrown in the trash. The ethos at the late stage of any empire is just total corruption, just rampant corruption. Just what was I going to say? Just ruthlessness. At the end stage, the prevailing ethos of society is ruthless. It's just complete ruthlessness. Just no compassion whatsoever. No morality whatsoever. It all just breaks down. It becomes just totally vicious and totally ruthless. And what previously were respected kind of solid democratic or civic institutions just become a complete farce. And that's what's happened. Just government becomes a total joke. And that's what's happened with ours. I mean, our politics is a laughingstock of the world. Our president, the candidate who will be facing this president, Biden, Trump and Biden, it's just a complete farce. In the end, government becomes just disinterested in even doing its job. Like, even the government loses interest in doing its job. And that's when a place really fucking falls apart. And that's what's going to happen here. And people are really blind to it. They think it's bad now. It'll get worse. So everything's falling apart. But it's happening because people are allowing it to happen. It's happening because people are allowing it to happen. And people are swallowing this culture and going along with it. And not using their voice when they actually do have one. Not speaking up when they should. And taking a stand. It's like World War II. Hitler and Neville Chamberlain. Appeasement. The appeasement strategy that the Allied powers were using towards the Nazis in the beginning. Not to connect to the whole Nazi panic now, but appeasement. People just telling themselves, maybe it's not that bad. It is bad. And the left wing is as bad as the right. Because it's been taken over by just complete psychosis. Just insanity. Most of it fueled by social media. Because the worst voices are always boosted. It's just the way human psychology works. So it's just where humans are at. Like, as bad as it is, I don't know if it could be better, because that's just where humans are at right now in their stage of evolution. So what you got to do is just rise above. Don't let it bring you down. Rise above. And just because everyone else around you is being garbage, don't fall into their patterns. I have. I'm not perfect. I've been garbage a lot of times in my life. But you can't fall into it just because you see everybody else around you doing it. And you can't give in to just frustration. That's a mistake I tend to make. Yeah, everything is just backwards. Like previous, everything's backwards. So you're a menace to society by not being a menace to society. You're a menace to society for not saying, burn it all down, kill all the cops. You know what I mean? It's all backwards from how it would be. So that's all I'm going to say with that. I'll call it right there. But yeah, you got to rise above, and you got to keep doing your thing and not get discouraged. That's the closing lesson. Malt Liquor Fridge 4. I'll see y'all next time.